He was on his knees with his hands behind his head when she finally looked at him, really looked at him, and what she saw made her stomach drop. Not because of the gun pressed against her temple. Not because 3 masked men had just turned a quiet Tuesday morning into a nightmare. But because the man she had dismissed like he was invisible 20 minutes earlier, the tired, ordinary-looking guy in the worn jacket she'd asked to be moved away from her, was watching the gunman with eyes that were absolutely, terrifyingly calm. And she realized with a cold clarity that cut through the panic that she had no idea who he was. If stories like this one hit you somewhere deep, subscribe to our channel right now so you never miss what's coming next. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city and country you're watching from. Every single comment means the world to us, and we love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to that Tuesday morning in Charlotte and find out who Owen Barrett really was. The First Carolina Commerce Bank on South Tryon Street in Charlotte, North Carolina, did not look like a place where lives could change. It looked exactly like what it was, a serious, marble-floored institution that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and handled enormous amounts of other people's money with quiet, practiced efficiency. The teller windows were polished. The potted plants near the entrance were real. The security camera in the upper corner of the main lobby had a small crack along its casing that nobody had gotten around to replacing. Celeste Marlowe arrived at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning, and she arrived the way she arrived everywhere, slightly ahead of schedule, slightly impatient, and trailing 2 assistants who struggled to keep pace with her in the lobby's marble echo. She was 30 years old. She ran a technology company called Vantara Solutions that specialized in data infrastructure and had, over the past 4 years, grown from a regional player into something that made the financial press use words like dominant and disruptive. She was about to close a billion-dollar acquisition that her competitors had spent 6 months trying to prevent. She had not slept more than 5 hours the night before. She had already reviewed the closing documents twice on the drive over, and she was wearing a charcoal blazer that cost more than most people's rent. She did not consider herself arrogant. She considered herself efficient. There was a difference. She would have told you, or she would have, before that Tuesday. Ms. Marlowe. Richard Ahn, the bank's senior relationship manager, appeared from behind the frosted glass partition with the practiced warmth of a man who handled very important clients and knew exactly how to make them feel managed without feeling managed. He was somewhere in his 50s, silver-haired, and wore a tie that was very slightly too tight. We have the Fairfield conference room reserved. If you'd like to follow me, give me 2 minutes, Celeste said, pulling up something on her phone. My legal team sent a revision on the indemnity clause at 11 last night, and I need to look at it before we sit down. Of course, Richard smiled. Can I have someone bring you coffee? Water? Coffee. Black. And can you move your signing area? She gestured vaguely toward the counter on her left, where a man in a faded navy blue work jacket was filling out a deposit slip. I'm going to need a little more space to spread out the documents. Richard glanced at the man, hesitated. I'll see what we can do, he said carefully. Owen Barrett did not look up. He had noticed Celeste Marlowe the moment she walked through the door, the way he noticed everyone who walked through a door: position, posture, the direction of their eyes, whether their hands were visible. It was not something he decided to do. It happened the way breathing happened, automatically, below the level of conscious thought. He had been standing at the counter for 4 minutes. He had $40 in his checking account after this deposit, which he was not thinking about, and approximately 3 weeks before the next paycheck from Haverford's Appliance and Refrigeration, which he was also not thinking about. He was thinking about Maddie. His daughter was 9 years old, which meant she was at an age where she was starting to understand things, really understand them, not just accept them the way small children accept whatever they're told. She had started asking questions about money, about why they drove the old truck instead of a newer one, about why some of her classmates went on spring break trips and she didn't. Owen had told her as honestly as he could that they were managing, that things were tight right now, but they were fine, that she didn't need to worry. She had looked at him with those brown eyes of hers, her mother's eyes, exactly her mother's eyes, and said, I'm not worried, Dad. I just want to understand. She was 9 years old and she wanted to understand. He was depositing the last of what he owed for her school fees, which the school had very politely but very clearly indicated needed to be received by the end of the week. He had borrowed $150 from his neighbor Frank Dowell and had promised to pay it back before the month was out, a promise he intended to keep even if it meant skipping a few grocery runs. He finished filling out the deposit slip. Behind him, he heard the woman in the charcoal blazer tell someone to move him. He didn't react. He folded the slip, slid it across the counter to the teller, handed over his check, and waited. "You're all set, Mr. Barrett," the teller said. "Anything else?" "No, thank you." He picked up his receipt, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and turned toward the exit. That was when the front doors burst open. They came in fast, 3 of them, dressed in dark clothing with balaclavas covering their faces. The first one through the door fired a single shot into the ceiling before anyone could register what was happening, and in the half-second of absolute silence that followed, the second man was already shouting, "Everybody down, hands where I can see them, now." The lobby fractured. Celeste dropped her phone. She heard it clatter across the marble, but couldn't make herself care, because one of the men was pointing a shotgun at the room, and her body had already made the calculation that the floor was the correct place to be. She went down hard on her knees, then her hands, and around her she heard the scramble and thud of 20 other people doing the same thing. Richard Ahn pressed himself behind the partition. A teller to Celeste's right started crying, quiet, rhythmic sobs that she couldn't suppress. A woman near the window with a stroller had pulled her baby against her chest and was hunched over it with her whole body like a shelter. The third robber, shorter than the other two, moving quick and jittery in a way that felt more dangerous than the deliberate movements of his partners, swept the room with his weapon and barked, "Phones! Face down! Anyone reaches for a phone, I promise you it's the last thing you do." Celeste looked up just enough to track the men without making herself a target, and she saw the man in the faded blue jacket. He was already on the floor. He'd gone down before anyone else. She realized she hadn't even seen him move. He was on one knee, then both knees, settling into the position so smoothly it looked like he'd rehearsed it. His hands were visible. His face was turned slightly to the side. He looked calm. Not frozen calm. The way Celeste was calm, the artificial stillness of someone managing terror by refusing to move. He looked genuinely, uncomfortably calm. The way an experienced surgeon looks while someone else panics. She didn't have time to think about it. "Phone's down," I said. "You!" The jittery one was pointing at her. "On the ground, face down. And don't you dare, I'm down," Celeste said, her voice steadier than she expected. She pressed her cheek against the cold marble. "I'm already down." The robbery, in its first 5 minutes, appeared to be a standard vault job. 2 of the men, the leader, who spoke with measured authority, and his partner moved the tellers into a controlled group and started working their way toward the vault access. The third man held the lobby, standard, organized. The kind of thing that had been done before and would, statistically, be contained by law enforcement within 45 minutes. Then the vault guard dropped his access card. It skittered across the floor and came to a stop near where the man in the blue jacket was kneeling. The jittery one pointed his weapon. "Pick it up. Slide it toward the vault." The man reached for the card without hesitation, and as he picked it up, his jacket sleeve pulled back and the jittery ones saw the edge of something on his forearm, a faded geometric tattoo, angular and precise, the kind that military units sometimes use. He didn't process it immediately, but he saw it. Owen slid the card across the floor. The shift happened at the 12-minute mark. By then, the leader had returned from the back with 3 large canvas bags, barking instructions to his partner. It should have been the point at which the operation began its exit sequence. Instead, he walked past Celeste on his way back across the lobby and stopped. He stopped because someone had left a leather portfolio on the floor near her. One of the assistants had dropped it when they went down, and it had fallen open. On the front cover, laser engraved into the leather, were 3 initials and a company name. CM Vantara Solutions. The leader picked up the portfolio. He looked at Celeste. She felt the look on her skin. "Hey." He crouched down in front of her. "Look at me." She did. He studied her face for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, the burner they'd brought, and opened a browser. He typed something. He waited 4 seconds. Then he turned the phone around so she could see the screen. It was Vantara's website. Her own headshot on the About page stared back at her. CEO Celeste Marlowe, 30 years old. Forbes 30 under 30, 3 years running. Well, the leader said very quietly. That changes things. Owen heard the shift in the room before he saw it. It was in the leader's voice, a new kind of calculation, slower and more careful, replacing the urgency of the vault job. He heard the leader say something low to the second man, heard the second man's sharp intake of breath, heard a woman near the window ask what was happening and get told to shut up. He had already sent the location signal. 4 minutes ago, before surrendering his phone, he'd triggered the emergency dispatch text he'd set up on his phone's lock screen, a feature most people didn't use, a feature he kept updated. The message went to 911 with his GPS coordinates. He had 30 seconds to do it, and he had done it in 18. The police were coming. The question was timing. A standard response to a bank robbery in progress typically brought patrol units within 6 to 8 minutes and tactical units within 12 to 16, depending on positioning. It had now been 12 minutes, which meant tactical was either on approach or deployed, which meant the robbers were approaching the moment when they would realize they were contained, which was the most dangerous moment in any hostage scenario. Owen watched the leader cross the lobby toward the woman in the charcoal blazer. He watched the leader crouch down. He watched the moment when the situation stopped being a robbery and started being something else. He did not allow himself to feel afraid, because fear was not useful right now. He allowed himself to think clearly, because that was what the situation required. He needed to split them. He looked at the floor between his knees. A coffee cup had tipped over near the counter earlier, leaving a brown stain spreading across the marble. 3 pens had rolled out from the teller desk. When everyone went down, he had not moved them. A heavy velvet rope barrier had been knocked sideways and was lying across the floor at an angle that partially blocked the sight line between the vault access corridor and the front lobby. He had not moved that either. He had moved other things, carefully and at precise moments when the men's attention was elsewhere. A fallen caution sign adjusted with his knee. A fallen portfolio case nudged with his foot so it sat at an angle that would reflect the overhead light toward the front camera, the one with the cracked casing, which he had clocked, because a cracked casing usually meant the wiring was loose, which meant the feed was either intermittent or out, which meant police arriving outside would not have eyes on the interior. Everything he had done had been deliberate. Every accident had been a choice. He raised his voice just enough to be heard across the lobby, not loud, not aggressive, just clear. There's a secondary cash storage room. The jittery one was closest to him. He swung his weapon toward Owen immediately. What did you say? I'm one of the maintenance contractors, Owen said, keeping his hands visible and his voice absolutely level. I've worked in this building for 2 months. There's a secondary storage room behind the back corridor, past the employee break room. The branch manager uses it for overflow cash during high-volume weeks. It doesn't show on the standard floor plan because it was added during the last renovation. You're lying. I might be, Owen said. Or you might be leaving several $100,000 in a room 20 feet behind you. Your call. He watched the calculation move across the man's face. Watched the jittery one look toward his leader, who had overheard the exchange and was now watching Owen carefully with an expression that was difficult to read. The leader stood up from beside Celeste. Take him, he told his partner, nodding toward the back corridor. Keep your phone on. The jittery one grabbed Owen's jacket and hauled him to his feet. Move. Owen moved. As they walked through the employee corridor, Owen noted the layout with the same automatic precision he used for everything. Emergency exit. 14 feet ahead on the right. Push bar style. Alarm equipped. Fire suppression panel, 6 feet left, currently inactive. Service elevator at the corridor's end, manual operation. The second gunman was breathing quickly, his footsteps uneven. He was scared. Scared men made decisions poorly. This better not be a waste of my time, the man muttered behind him. It's not, Owen said. He walked steadily without rushing. Ahead of them, at the corridor's end, was a service door that led to a utility room that contained no secondary cash storage whatsoever. He was aware of this. He was also aware that in approximately 90 seconds, if his timing was correct, the tactical team outside was going to attempt contact via the building's external intercom system standard protocol, and that the resulting announcement would reach the leader through his earpiece. He needed the next 60 seconds. He stumbled slightly, catching himself against the wall with one hand. The second gunman shoved him forward. Owen let himself absorb the shove and used the momentum to reach the fire suppression panel as he steadied himself. His fingers found the manual test trigger. He pressed it. The alarm was not the shrieking variety. It was a low, sustained tone, the kind that sounded like a malfunction rather than an emergency, designed to alert staff without causing panic. It activated the emergency lighting in the corridor, which cast everything in a pale yellow that was slightly disorienting. What the second gunman said. Building alarm, Owen said. Probably triggered by the gunshot. It'll reset in a few seconds. He was lying. It would not reset in a few seconds. It had sent an automatic signal to the building's external security panel, which was connected to the emergency response systems the Charlotte police had already been monitoring since his first message went through. Outside, the tactical commander would now be receiving confirmation of active internal movement in the service corridor. Owen turned to face the gunman calmly. "The room's through that door," he said. The gunman looked at the door, looked at Owen, looked back at the door, and from far back in the lobby, they both heard the leader's voice change. Celeste had been watching the exits. She didn't know she was doing it. Consciously, it was just that her eyes kept moving to the front doors, the side corridor, the frosted partition, tracking the positions of the one gunman remaining in the lobby, with the automatic logic of pure undiluted survival instinct. She had spoken briefly to the woman next to her, a teller named Patricia, 50s, who was gripping her own wrist to stop her hands from shaking. Celeste hadn't had anything useful to say. She just said stay down in the steadiest voice she could find, and Patricia had nodded. She was thinking about the man in the blue jacket, what he had said, the complete absence of fear in his voice when he said it. Your call. Who said that? Who lay on a marble floor at gunpoint and said your call like they were discussing a restaurant menu? She heard the external intercom click on 2 short tones, the kind that preceded an official announcement, and in the same moment she saw the leader's hand go to his ear. She saw his face go still. Then he said very quietly, change of plans. He turned toward the lobby. He looked at Celeste, and the way he looked at her made her understand, with absolute clarity, that the situation had just gotten considerably worse. She pressed her hands flat against the cold marble floor and thought, very clearly, where is that man? The leader's name, the one he used with his crew, not the one on any documentation, was Reese. Nobody in the lobby knew that. They knew his voice, which was controlled and deliberate, in a way that was more frightening than shouting. They knew the way he moved unhurried, economical, the kind of movement that suggested he had done difficult things before, and hadn't been particularly surprised by how they felt. And they knew, now, that his original plan had just been interrupted by something outside, and that the interruption had made him dangerous in a new and specific way. He walked to the center of the lobby and looked around the room the way a man looks around a room when he is recalculating everything in it. On your feet, he said. All of you, against the far wall. Nobody moved immediately, not from defiance, just from the animal paralysis that comes when a body can't process the instruction fast enough, and he said it again, sharper this time. I said on your feet. Move. Celeste got up. Her knees ached from the marble and her hands were cold, and as she stood, she was aware of how thoroughly her body had decided to be afraid without consulting her. Her heartbeat was wrong too fast, too shallow, thudding in her throat in a way she had never felt before, despite every high-stakes boardroom she had walked into over the past 4 years. This was different. This was her body telling her something her mind already knew, that the polished control she maintained in every other area of her life was not available to her here. She pressed herself against the wall with Patricia and the others. There were 19 people in the lobby when the doors burst open, she had counted, without quite knowing why, in the first seconds of chaos. Now she counted again. 17. Owen and one gunman were still in the back corridor. Reese noticed her counting. Sit down, he told her. I'm standing. He looked at her for a moment. It was not a long moment. Then he moved on, which somehow felt like it contained a warning more effective than anything he could have said. The third man, the one who had held the lobby from the start, who moved with the jittery excess energy of someone running on adrenaline and bad decisions, was near the entrance, watching the front windows. Through the glass, the street looked normal from this angle. Celeste knew it wasn't. She had heard the intercom tones. She had worked in enough high-stakes corporate environments to recognize the sound of a coordinated external response beginning. They've got the building, she said not loudly, mostly to Patricia beside her. Patricia looked at her. Her eyes were very wide. How do you know? The intercom. That's a tactical contact signal, she paused. I think. She didn't actually know that with any certainty. She had heard it once in a security briefing her company had mandated 2 years ago after a threat assessment following the acquisition of a cybersecurity firm. The consultant had mentioned it in passing. She had remembered it the way she remembered most things completely, and without having made a conscious decision to retain it. So they're outside, Patricia whispered. Yes. That's good, right? It means the men inside know they're outside, Celeste said, which is the part I'm less comfortable about. In the service corridor, the fire alarm's sustained tone was still cycling, when the second gunman's phone buzzed against his leg. He grabbed it with his free hand, keeping his weapon pointed loosely at Owen, and looked at the screen. Whatever he read made his jaw tighten. "Turn around," he said. "Excuse me?" "Turn around. We're going back." Owen turned around slowly and began walking back toward the lobby. He kept his pace deliberate, not slow enough to seem like he was stalling, not fast enough to seem eager. His mind was running a separate, quieter calculation the entire time. The tactical team outside had made contact. Reese knew the building was surrounded. That meant Reese's operating window had collapsed from whatever he'd originally intended down to something much shorter and much more volatile. A man with a plan is dangerous. A man whose plan has just broken apart is dangerous in a completely different way, and the second kind is harder to predict. Owen needed to get back into that lobby. He needed to see where Celeste Marlowe was positioned, where the third man was standing, and what Reese was doing with his hands. The second Zunman shoved him through the corridor door. The lobby had reorganized itself in Owen's absence. Everyone was against the far wall now, sitting or crouching in a loose line. Reese stood in the center of the room with his weapon across his body, not quite raised, but not quite lowered. The third man, Owen, had started thinking of him as the nervous one, because it was accurate and because naming things clearly was useful, had moved from the entrance to a position near the teller windows, which gave him sight lines in two directions, but also put him closer to the area with the most civilians. That was a problem. Owen let himself be pushed into line against the wall. He sat. He scanned the room the way he had been scanning rooms since he was 22 years old, and someone with more experience than him had explained that the difference between coming home and not coming home was usually something you noticed in the first 15 seconds. 3 hostages near the window, young mother with the baby, an elderly man who had been doing paperwork when everything started, a teenage girl who had come in with a prepaid card and had the terrible luck of picking this particular Tuesday. Patricia the teller, 6 feet to Celeste's right, who was keeping herself together through sheer force of will. 2 of Celeste's assistants, on the floor, one of whom had been quietly sick into a trash can near the wall and was now trying to be invisible. The bank guard, disarmed, sitting with his hands zip-tied, the only person in the room who had been visibly restrained, which told Owen something about the robber's preparation level, and Celeste. She was against the wall with the others, but she was sitting differently than anyone else. Not rigidly, she wasn't performing composure. It was more that she had made a series of quiet, practical decisions. Feet flat on the floor, weight forward slightly, hands loose in her lap. She was watching Reese the way Owen had been watching him. Tracking him. Thinking. She caught Owen looking at her. He looked away first. Reese turned toward the group. "I need a phone. Somebody give me a working phone." He paused. "Not yours," he said, looking at the teenage girl who had started to reach for her jacket pocket. "Yours." He was looking at Celeste. "My assistants collected them," Celeste said. "Your man told everyone to put their phones face down. They picked them up." "Which one?" Celeste nodded toward the assistant. On the left, a young man named Darian, who had been with her company for 8 months, and who was at this moment the color of old concrete. Reese walked over. Darian handed him a phone without being asked. His hands were shaking badly enough that the phone clattered against Reese's palm. Reese looked at it. Unlocked. He scrolled through the contacts briefly, then put it in his pocket. "Here's what's happening," he said, addressing the room but looking primarily at Celeste. "Police are outside. That changes the timeline, but it doesn't change the destination. We're leaving this building, and because the people outside have apparently decided to complicate my morning, we're going to need some company." He meant her. Everyone in the room understood that he meant her. Celeste said nothing. "You're going to stand up," Reese continued, "and you're going to walk with me to the front exit, and you're going to do it calmly because the alternative is no." The word came out of her mouth before she had fully decided to say it. She felt the fear spike immediately after a cold physical rush that started in her chest, but the word was already in the room, and she wasn't going to take it back. Reese looked at her with an expression that wasn't anger. It was closer to mild professional surprise, the way a mechanic looks when a bolt is stripped when it shouldn't be. "Excuse me? I'm not walking to the front exit with you," Celeste said. Her voice was steady. She didn't know how. "You take me out that door. You lose your only leverage with the police, and you acquire a kidnapping charge on top of everything else. That's not better for you. That's worse. You're not in a position to—" "I'm in the only position that matters," she said. "You need me willing. Dragging me out of here by force makes the police response go from containment to something else entirely, and you know that. She did not entirely know what she was talking about. She was running on instinct and adrenaline, and 4 years of negotiating with people who held things she wanted. She was also aware in the back of her mind that she was gambling with the safety of 18 other people in this room, and that if she was wrong about Reese's calculations, the consequences would not fall only on her. The room was very quiet. Reese tilted his head slightly. He was looking at her, the way someone looks at a chess piece that has done something unexpected. Then he said, "You have more nerve than sense." "Most people tell me that," Celeste said. Something moved at the edge of her vision. She didn't look directly. She had learned that much from watching Owen. A direct look draws attention. She kept her eyes on Reese and let her peripheral vision do the work. Owen had shifted his position by approximately 2 feet. He was still against the wall, still sitting, still, apparently compliant. But he had moved, and the movement had put him 6 inches closer to the nervous one near the teller windows and slightly outside the direct sight line between Reese and the entrance corridor. She didn't know what it meant. She knew it was deliberate. Owen had heard Celeste's exchange with Reese and had spent approximately 4 seconds deciding whether it was going to help him or create a new problem. He concluded, provisionally, that it was going to help him. Not because she was right about the legal calculus, she was, more or less, but that wasn't the operative issue. The operative issue was that Reese was now engaged. His attention was on Celeste. His partner, the second gunman, who had taken Owen to the back corridor, had positioned himself near the vault access door on Owen's right, which put him 15 feet away, with a support column partially in the sight line. And the nervous one was still near the teller windows, body language getting worse by the minute. The nervous one was the problem Owen kept coming back to. In any high-pressure situation involving armed individuals, the trained ones were predictable, because training is, at its core, about creating predictable responses. You could read a trained person. You could work with what they would predictably do. The untrained ones, the ones running on instinct and fear, and the specific bad combination of feeling cornered and feeling guilty, were the ones who made the situations go sideways. Not from calculation, from a single bad second. The nervous one was having a lot of bad seconds. Owen could see it in his hands, which kept adjusting their grip on the weapon. In his feet, which shifted their stance every 40 seconds or so, the unconscious movement of a body that wanted to be somewhere else. In his eyes, which kept going to the front windows even though there was nothing visible outside that would tell him anything useful. He was going to do something. Owen didn't know what. He needed to reduce that uncertainty before Reese finished whatever negotiation he was running with Celeste, because once Reese had resolved that variable, his attention would be back on the room, and the window Owen was slowly building would close. He looked down at the floor in front of him. 2 of the pens he hadn't moved earlier were still there, roughly 4 feet away. Useless as a weapon, barely useful as a distraction, but a distraction wasn't what he needed them for. He needed the nervous one to move 2 feet to his left, which would bring him past the counter edge and into his position where the sight line from the vault access corridor was broken. He needed the nervous one to choose to move there on his own. Owen looked at the young mother with the baby. She was on his left, closest to the window, and she had been very quiet and very still since the first minute, which took an amount of self-control Owen recognized and respected. The baby had started fussing, that low preliminary sound that means escalation is coming, and she was rocking it with small, desperate movements, trying to forestall the inevitable. The baby started crying, not fussing crying, full voice. The way babies cry when they have decided the situation is not acceptable, and they want everyone in a 40-foot radius to know it. The nervous one flinched at the sound and took 2 steps toward the mother, instinctively. "Keep that thing quiet," he said, and the 2 steps had taken him exactly to the position Owen needed him in. Owen stood up. He didn't stand up fast. He didn't make a production of it. He just put his feet under him and rose to his full height and said, in a completely conversational voice, "Let me help her." Every head in the room turned toward him, including Reese's, including the second gunman's. "Sit down," the nervous one said. "She can't manage the baby and stay seated at the same time," Owen said. He was looking at the nervous one directly, which was a choice. Direct eye contact with a frightened armed man is either the right move or a very bad one, and the line between them is thin. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stand here and help her hold the baby so she can keep it quiet. That's all. You don't take direction, do you?" Reese said from across the room. "I take direction fine," Owen said. I'm asking for permission to help a woman hold her baby. I'll sit back down the second you tell me to." There was a beat of silence, in which several things happened simultaneously. The baby continued to cry. The nervous one looked at Reese. Reese looked at Owen, and Owen stood completely still with his hands slightly away from his body, demonstrating the most thorough absence of threat he knew how to project. Reese made a sound that was almost a short laugh. "If you try anything, I won't," Owen said, and he walked the 3 steps to where the young mother was kneeling, crouched beside her and took the baby from her arms with the practiced ease of a man who had done this 6,000 times. He had been doing it since May was 3 weeks old and Elena was too exhausted to stand. The baby was maybe 8 months old, red-faced and furious, small fists clenching and unclenching. Owen shifted it against his chest, turned it so its face was tucked against his shoulder, and began moving in the same small rocking motion the mother had been using. He added a low, steady sound, not quite a hum, not quite a word, just a vibration in his chest that he had discovered. Through months of exhausted trial and error in a small apartment with a newborn he had no idea how to manage, actually helped. The baby's crying dropped in register. Didn't stop, but dropped. "Thank you," the mother whispered. She was shaking. "You're doing well," Owen told her. It wasn't the kind of thing he'd normally say. He said it because it was true, and because she needed to hear something that was true. He settled into the crouching position beside her, which put him lower than he'd been standing, and while the room's attention was still scattered by the baby and by the movement, he used his knee to shift the velvet rope barrier another 18 inches to the left. It made no sound. It moved easily on the marble. Nobody saw it. He was building something. Brick by invisible brick, he was constructing the architecture of a situation he could control in a room where 3 armed men believed they were the ones doing the controlling. The baby quieted to a snuffle. The nervous one let out a breath. "Fine," he said to no one in particular. "Fine." Reese had moved on from his conversation with Celeste, having apparently decided that the direct extraction approach was worth revisiting later. He was on the phone now, Darian's phone, which Celeste assumed meant he was attempting to reach someone outside, possibly his own contacts rather than the police. She watched him from 6 feet away and tried to understand what she was looking at. She was good at reading people. She had built a company by being better at reading people than most of her competitors, by understanding what they actually wanted versus what they said they wanted, and by figuring out which variable she could move to change the equation. It was the thing she was genuinely best at, and she knew it, even on the days she couldn't be honest about much else. Reese was harder to read than anyone she had encountered in a boardroom. Not because he was hiding something, everyone hid something, but because what he was hiding was compressed into a very small space, very efficiently, and what he showed instead was so controlled it gave her almost nothing to work with. He was afraid, though. She had caught it once, 30 seconds ago, in the way his hand tightened on the phone. A brief, involuntary tension that lasted less than a second before the control came back. He hadn't expected the police response to be this fast. Whatever his original window had been, it was shorter now, and he knew it, and the fear that produced was the first real piece of information she'd had since this started. "You planned this around the vault," she said. He looked at her. "You had a specific window," she continued, "in and out before law enforcement could position. Something went wrong with the timeline." He said nothing. "I'm not saying this to antagonize you," Celeste said. "I'm saying it because if your timeline is broken, staying in this building doesn't help you. And if you're thinking about using me to create a new timeline, you should understand that my company's board of directors will not negotiate under duress. I wrote that policy myself. You wrote a lot of policies." "I did." Reese looked at her for a long moment. "What are you exactly?" "I told you, CEO. I didn't ask what your job title was. I asked what you are." She didn't answer that immediately because she didn't entirely know, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise to a man holding a weapon in a bank lobby. "Trying to get home," she finally said. Something shifted in Reese's face. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't even close to warmth, but it was recognition. She had said something real, and he had heard it. He looked away from her. She exhaled slowly through her nose and looked across the room to where Owen was crouched against the wall with someone else's baby, quiet against his chest, and she had the unsettling and specific thought that she was looking at the most competent person in this room, and she had almost gotten him moved away from her like a piece of furniture 45 minutes ago. Owen had been counting the seconds since the fire suppression alarm triggered. 11 minutes. In his experience, which was the kind of experience nobody accumulates in ordinary life. 11 minutes from confirmed internal movement was long enough for a tactical team to have positioned and run their assessment. They would want to negotiate first. That was procedure, and procedure existed because it worked more often than the alternative. But they would be staged. They would be ready. And if something inside the building changed in a way that suggested immediate threat to life, the calculus could shift. He needed whatever was coming next to happen on his terms, not Reese's. He handed the baby back to the mother, who took it with a whispered sound that wasn't quite a word. He stayed crouched beside her, but shifted his weight forward onto the balls of his feet.
Hey.
He kept his voice very low. The nervous one was 8 feet away, currently looking toward the front windows again. What's your name? The mother looked at him. Sasha. Sasha. If I tell you to get down, you go flat and you cover the baby with your whole body. Don't think about it. Don't look up. Just go flat. Can you do that? Her eyes went wide. I'm not telling you something is about to happen, Owen said quickly, before the fear on her face could become anything louder. I'm telling you that if something happens, you know exactly what to do. That's different. Okay? She swallowed, nodded. Okay, he looked to his left. The elderly man was watching him, had been watching him for several minutes, Owen realized, with an expression of careful assessment that suggested he was a person who had spent his life watching other people and was doing the same thing now with specific interest. Owen met his eyes, gave him the smallest, most minimal nod. The elderly man nodded back once and shifted his position slightly, feet moving under him, weight redistributing. He understood. Owen looked toward Celeste. She was watching Reese. Reese had put the phone down and was speaking quietly to his partner, the second gunman, who had crossed from the vault access area to the center of the room. They were close together, voices below the level of the lobby's ambient sound. That was a change in position. Owen didn't like changes in position he hadn't anticipated. He watched the body language between Reese and the second man, the way Reese's chin tilted slightly toward the front entrance, the way the second man's eyes moved to Celeste and then back. The way Reese made a short, decisive movement with his right hand that landed somewhere between a signal and a conclusion. They had made a decision, and based on the direction of the second man's first step as they separated, the decision involved moving toward Celeste. Owen was already on his feet when it started. Up, the second gunman said, reaching for Celeste's arm. Now, we're moving. Celeste pulled her arm back. Don't touch me. Lady, I said don't touch me. She was standing, which she hadn't planned, and her voice had a heat in it that surprised even her. You put your hand on me again, and I promise you, the people outside are going to hear about it in detail. That's enough, Reese said, crossing toward them. This doesn't have to be. He stopped because something had moved across the room. Owen had covered the distance between the far wall and the teller counter in 4 steps, and he had done it in the time it took Reese to say 3 words. He hadn't run. It wasn't quite running. It was the kind of movement that comes from a body that has been trained to cover space efficiently, without the telegraphing that normal movement has no wind-up, no anticipation, just suddenly being somewhere different from where you were. He put himself between Celeste and the second gunman. He did not reach for the weapon. He did not raise his hands. He just stood there, 6 feet tall in his faded work jacket, and the second gunman was close enough that raising the weapon to fire would require moving it past Owen to do it. Step back, the second gunman said. His voice had a new quality in it. She's not going anywhere with you, Owen said. His voice had no new quality in it. It was the same voice he'd used to tell the man about the fictional cash room, flat, plain, and carrying a weight that had nothing to do with volume. Owen. Celeste's voice came from behind him, slightly unsteady. You don't have to, I know, he said. Not to Reese. Not to the gunman. To her. The nervous one had come off the windows and was crossing the room. Reese was raising his weapon. 3 men converging and Owen standing in the center of it like he had all the time in the world. He moved first. He went left, away from Celeste, which pulled the second gunman's weapon to the left. The instinct to track a moving target is nearly impossible to suppress, and the second gunman was not a trained man. The weapon swung left. Owen's left hand came up and redirected it further left, past the line of his body, and in the same motion he stepped inside the man's reach, close enough that the weapon was essentially useless, and drove his right elbow into the man's sternum. It wasn't elegant. His left ankle caught the velvet rope barrier he had moved to, precisely this position 40 minutes ago, and he stumbled, which pulled the second gunman with him and took them both into the side of the teller counter. Owen's shoulder hit the edge hard enough to send a bright spike of pain down his arm that he noted and set aside. He got his weight back, got his hands on the weapon. The second gunman was fighting him for it, and the man was bigger than he looked heavier, with the instinctive strength of someone who works with his hands, and for 3 seconds it was genuinely uncertain, which was not a thing Owen had experienced in a while, and which arrived with a specific cold clarity that sharpened everything. Then his training arrived and made certain decisions on his behalf. His left hand changed its grip on the barrel. His right hand found the pressure point below the man's elbow. The weapon came free. He had it. He cleared it of ammunition in 2 movements and put it on the counter behind him in a single sweeping motion, out of reach and empty. But Reese had Celeste. Owen turned and found exactly what he was afraid of finding. Reese had moved while the struggle was happening, used it as cover, the way a professional would, and now had Celeste pulled back against him, with the muzzle of his weapon against the side of her neck. The nervous one was somewhere on Owen's right, weapon up, not steady. The lobby was completely silent except for the baby, who had started crying again, and the distant sound of something, a vehicle, a door, movement from somewhere outside the building. That, Reese said, was impressively stupid. Probably, Owen said. He was breathing. His shoulder hurt. His hands were completely still. Celeste's eyes found his across the room. She was afraid, genuinely, visibly afraid, in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in the previous 40 minutes. And it was honest, and it was human, and it made her look younger than 30 years old. But she was also watching him with something else beneath the fear. Something that was trying to understand what he was. "Tell me your name," Reese said. Owen looked at him. "Owen Barrett." "Owen Barrett," Reese repeated it slowly. "What are you, Owen Barrett?" The same question he had asked Celeste 20 minutes ago. Owen thought about Maddie, about the deposit receipt in his jacket pocket, about Frank Dowell and the $150 and the grocery runs he was going to skip, about the faded tattoo on his forearm that the nervous one had seen and correctly identified as something, and incorrectly cataloged as nothing important. "Just a father," Owen said. "Trying to get home." Reese stared at him. The sound outside the building grew closer. Something, no. Multiple somethings moving in coordinated pattern around the perimeter. The tactical team had finished staging. Reese knew it. Owen knew it. And somewhere in the tight silence of the marble lobby, with a crying baby and 17 frightened people, and a CEO held at gunpoint, and a single father with an empty weapon on the counter behind him, the moment balanced itself on whatever was going to happen next. The building's external intercom clicked on for the second time. The voice that came through was calm and professional. The particular kind of professional that comes from years of training people to keep their voices calm in situations where calm voices save lives. It identified itself as the Charlotte Police Department Crisis Response Unit. It stated that the building was surrounded. It stated that nobody inside would be harmed if the situation was resolved peacefully. It stated that a direct negotiation line was being established and requested that someone inside make contact. It said all of this in approximately 45 seconds. Then it went quiet. In the lobby, nobody moved for 3 full seconds. Then Reese said, "Shut that off," even though there was nothing to shut off, because the intercom had already gone silent, and even though nobody in the room had any mechanism to shut it off anyway. He said it because he needed to say something that sounded like control, and everyone in the room understood that, including Owen. Owen had not moved from his position in the center of the floor. His shoulder was sensing consistent signals of objection up through his neck, and he had cataloged those signals and set them aside in the way he had learned to set aside physical input that wasn't immediately operationally relevant. The pain was real. He would deal with it later. Right now, the operative facts were as follows. Reese had Celeste. The nervous one, Owen, had since revised his assessment of the man, who had moved with more purpose in the last 2 minutes and was less nervous than he appeared, and more calculating, which was its own kind of problem, was positioned on Owen's right at roughly his 2 o'clock. The second gunman was against the teller counter, winded and furious, and cradling the arm Owen had leveraged for the weapon, which suggested the elbow hadn't taken the pressure well. He was not incapacitated. He was angry, which was worse than scared and better than calm. 3 men, 2 with operational weapons, 1 with a grievance, and Celeste, who was doing something Owen had not fully anticipated. She was talking, not to him, to Reese. Quietly, in the tone someone uses when they are trying to make a very specific point land, without triggering the thing that ends the conversation. "The negotiator is going to call the number on Darian's phone in approximately 4 minutes, she said. That's standard protocol. They'll have already pulled registered numbers associated with this location. When they call, you need to answer it. Not because I'm telling you to. Because if you don't, they assume the worst and the options narrow. You run crisis negotiations in your spare time? Reese said. I ran acquisitions. It's the same math. She paused. Answer the phone. Buy yourself time to think. Right now, you're not thinking, you're reacting. And reaction is how this goes sideways. Owen listened to this and adjusted his assessment of Celeste Marlowe for the third time since the front doors had burst open. The first time had been when she said no to Reese, with 17 people's lives in the room. The second time had been when she told the lobby about the intercom tones and been right. The third time was now, watching her negotiate with a man holding a gun to her neck, with the same focused clarity she had probably used to close whatever billion-dollar deal had brought her to this bank in the first place. She was afraid. He could hear it in the slight compression of her vowels, the way her breathing was a half-beat too controlled, the way she held herself against Reese's arm with a stillness that was effort rather than ease. She was afraid, and she was doing it anyway, and Owen found that he respected it in a way that was separate from the immediate problem of getting her and everyone else out of this building. He moved his eyes to the nervous one without moving his head. The man had a name. Owen had caught it when Reese used it in a sharp undertone 20 minutes ago during the first reorganization of the lobby. Marcus. He was younger than Reese, mid-30s probably, with the lean build of someone who moved a lot and ate inconsistently, and was currently running on the wrong fuel for the situation he was in. His weapon was a compact semi-automatic that he held with both hands at a position that was technically correct and practically shaky, which meant he had been trained at some point, and the training hadn't entirely held. The second Sunman was starting to recover. Owen could hear his breathing evening out, see him shifting his weight off the counter. He wasn't going to stay out of the equation much longer. Owen needed to move the pieces before the equation balanced itself in a direction he couldn't manage. He said, Reese. Reese looked at him over Celeste's shoulder with an expression of someone who was rapidly running out of patience for situations he hadn't designed. You're a planner, Owen said. I can see that. The timing on this was calculated. The positions you took when you came in: doorman, vault, team, lobby control, that's coordinated. You've run something like this before. What's your point? My point is that planned men don't like chaos. And what's happening right now is chaos. You've got police staged outside, 2 of your 3 men partially compromised, and a lobby full of people who've had long enough to get their heads back. That's a lot of variables you didn't write into the plan. Reese was watching him carefully. Not the way someone watches a threat. The way someone watches a thing they're trying to categorize. You're trying to get me to negotiate with the police, Reese said. I'm trying to get you to think about the next 20 minutes instead of the next 2, Owen said, because the next 2 minutes have already been decided. What's not decided is how this ends, and you care how it ends. I have a 9-year-old daughter, Owen said. I care considerably how it ends. A silence followed. That was different from the other silences, in the lobby less paralyzed, more like something being considered. The baby had quieted again. Patricia the teller had her eyes closed, and her lips pressed together in an expression of pure, private concentration that Owen recognized as a person holding themselves together through sheer repetition of will. Darian, Celeste's assistant, had his knees pulled to his chest and was watching Owen with the widest eyes in the room. Then Reese's phone rang. Not Darian's phone. Reese's own phone, the one that wasn't the burner buzzing in his pocket with the specific rhythm of an incoming call. Reese looked at it. His jaw did something complicated. He looked at Celeste, then at Owen, then at the phone. He answered it. Owen could not hear what was being said on the other end. He could hear Reese's side of the conversation, which was mostly silence punctuated by 2 short words and 1 longer sentence that he spoke quietly enough that only the nearest people caught it. But he could also see Reese's face, and what he saw in the 20 seconds of that phone call was a sequence of expressions that told him more than the words would have. Recognition first, then something harder, then a specific kind of stillness that Owen associated from experience with a person who has received information that has just changed the shape of a decision they thought they'd already made. Reese hung up. He stood very still for a moment. Then he moved the weapon away from Celeste's neck. Not down, he still had it raised, still held her with 1 arm, but away from the direct contact point. Marcus, he said. The nervous one Marcus looked at him. Get the bags from the back. Marcus hesitated. We're still going through with get the bags, Reese said. His voice had changed. Something had settled in it, a decision that had weight. We're done here. Owen's entire body recalibrated. Done here was not the same as surrendering. Done here, coming from a man like Reese in a moment like this, meant something specific. It meant the original objective was being abandoned in favor of an exit, and exits from contained situations required coverage, and coverage sometimes required a hostage, and the hostage was still in Reese's arm. Owen looked at the front entrance. The police would have eyes on it. Coming out the front with a hostage was a known equation that ended in a specific set of outcomes, none of which were good for Celeste. He looked at the service corridor door, still closed. The tactical team's external positioning would not have covered the building's service entrance on the east side, not with the response time they'd had. It was a gap. Reese had probably already identified it. He was a planner, as Owen had said, and a gap in an otherwise covered perimeter was exactly the kind of thing a planned man would move toward. Owen had approximately 90 seconds before Marcus returned from the back with the bags. He looked at the floor. The velvet rope barrier was still where he'd moved it. The scattered pens were still where they'd fallen. The coffee stain from the tipped cup near the counter had dried at the edges and was darker in the center. The heavy plastic caution sign he'd adjusted with his knee early in the situation had been knocked sideways again in the struggle and was now lying across the direct path between the teller counter and the service corridor entrance, not blocking it, but across it, low to the ground, the kind of thing that caught a foot at speed in a way that was startling rather than injurious. He had not moved that one. It had moved on its own. He was going to use it anyway. "Can I ask you something?" Owen said. Reese looked at him with an expression of someone who has very little remaining tolerance for questions, but not yet closed that door entirely. "The phone call," Owen said. "Someone told you something that changed your mind about the exit. I'm not asking what it was. I'm asking if what changed was something about her." He nodded toward Celeste. "Because if it was, and if whatever you just heard made taking her out that door a problem for you, then we have more to talk about than you think." Reese's expression didn't change, but his eyes moved to Celeste for 1 second, and that 1 second told Owen everything. Someone on Reese's phone had told him something about Celeste Marlowe that had made her a liability rather than an asset. Owen didn't know what. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Reese was now in the position of having organized a complex operation around a variable that had just stopped working in his favor, and men in that position made decisions based on frustration rather than strategy. Frustrated men were dangerous. Frustrated men with weapons and a 90-second window were the specific type of dangerous that Owen had spent 12 years learning to manage. The service corridor door opened, and Marcus came back with 2 canvas bags, which he dropped near Reese's feet. He looked at Owen, then at Reese, then at the bags. We're moving, Reese said. "What about her too?" Reese said. Owen said, "No, it came out flat and final, the same way a door shuts when the latch catches. Not loud, not aggressive, just complete." Every person in the lobby went still. Reese looked at Owen with something that was past impatience now, past the professional assessment, and had reached the specific place where a man who is used to being the most dangerous thing in a room looks at something that is behaving as if that isn't true. "You're going to get yourself killed," Reese said. "Maybe," Owen said. "But you're not taking her." He said it without heat and without drama, and the absence of both things made it land differently than a threat would have. It was just a fact he was stating. Something that was going to be true, regardless of what anyone preferred. Reese raised his weapon. Owen moved. He had been calculating the angle for the last 4 minutes. Reese was 6 feet away, slightly angled left because Celeste was on his left side, which meant the weapon raised across his body rather than straight, a fraction less stable, a fraction slower to reacquire if disturbed. Owen came in low, and from the right, which was the outside of Reese's weapon arm, which was not intuitive. Most people moved away from the weapon, not around it, and his right hand went for the barrel while his left shoulder drove into Reese's weapon side arm. The gun discharged. The sound inside the marble lobby was enormous, a single crack that split the air and hit the walls and came back from every direction at once, and in the half-second after it, Owen did not know where the round had gone, and he could not stop to find out. Reese was stronger than he'd expected, bigger through the chest than the dark jacket had suggested, and he fought for the weapon with the focused desperation of a man who understood exactly what losing it meant. They went into the counter together, Reese's back against the edge, and Owen felt something in his already damaged shoulder give in a way that sent white light across his vision for 1 second. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Stopping was the variable that ended this wrong. His left hand found Reese's wrist. He applied pressure at the specific angle that 12 years of training had made as automatic as breathing. The wrist rotated. The weapon dropped. Reese drove his knee up. Owen took it in the thigh, instead of where it had been aimed, which was luck more than skill, and the impact sent him back 2 steps and put distance between them that Reese immediately used to reach for the fallen weapon. Owen kicked it, not at anyone. Across the floor, sliding on the marble, coming to rest under the teller counter in a position that required Reese to get down and reach for it with his back exposed, which was not something he was going to do in a room he no longer controlled. Reese straightened up. Owen straightened up. They looked at each other across 3 feet of lobby floor, and the accounting between them in that moment was very clear, to both of them. Reese had Marcus. Owen had a dislocated or severely damaged shoulder that was rapidly becoming a problem. The second gunman was pushing off the wall, moving again. And somewhere in the room, Celeste had gotten herself free of Reese's arm when the gun went off. Owen had felt her absence from his peripheral vision, which meant she'd moved, which meant she was either down or clear. He needed her to be clear. "Celeste," he said, not taking his eyes off Reese. "Where are you?" "Behind the counter," she said. Her voice was 6 feet to his left, and it was shaking, but it was there. "Stay there. I'm not going anywhere." Marcus has had the bags and was moving toward the service corridor. Owen tracked him without turning his head. The second gunman was almost at Reese's position. Reese had made a calculation. Owen could see it happen in real time, in the way the man's weight shifted and his eyes moved, and the calculation had come out with a number Reese didn't like. Because the number was that the exit he'd planned was still available, and the asset he'd planned to bring through it was not, and the alternative was a lobby fight against a man who had already taken his weapon and driven him into a counter, and the fight wasn't resolving in a direction he recognized. Reese said one word to the second gunman. Owen caught it. It wasn't a name. It was an instruction. Then Reese moved toward the service corridor. He moved faster than Owen had expected from a man his size, and the second gunman moved toward Owen at the same time, which was the designed distraction, and it almost worked. Almost. Owen sidestepped the second gunman's rush by 3 inches, which was enough but barely, and caught him with his good arm as he went past, turning his momentum into the teller counter for the second time in 10 minutes. The man's head connected with the counter edge with a sound that was not a good sound, and he went down and stayed down. Owen did not feel good about it. He felt that it was necessary, which was different, and he had learned the difference between those 2 things a long time ago in a place he didn't talk about. He turned toward the service corridor. Reese was already through the door. Marcus was 2 steps behind him, 1 bag over each shoulder, and as the door swung shut behind Reese, Marcus turned back toward the lobby for 1 second with his weapon raised covering the retreat, the last competent tactical decision either of them made that day. He saw Owen coming. He fired. Owen threw himself left, behind the velvet rope barrier standard, which provided approximately no actual ballistic protection, and was absolutely not what he was using it. For he was using it to break the sight line for the half-second he needed to cover the distance to the caution sign on the floor, which he got his foot behind and drove across the corridor threshold in the exact moment Marcus stepped backward through the door. The caution sign caught Marcus's heel. He went down hard on the corridor floor, 1 bag spilling, his weapon arm hitting the ground first in the way that makes a hand release what it's holding. The weapon skittered. Owen was through the door before Marcus had processed that he'd fallen, and he stepped over him and kept moving. The corridor was 15 feet long. Reese was at the end of it. The emergency exit door was already open. Reese had hit the push bar and was halfway through it, and through the gap Owen could see the outside, a narrow alley between the bank's east wall and a parking structure, and beyond it the flash of Charlotte daylight, and moving at the alley's mouth, moving fast, 2 figures in tactical gear who had not expected anyone to come through that door right now. Reese saw them at the same moment they saw him. He stopped. He stopped because the alley was covered, and the gap he'd identified in the tactical perimeter had been closed in the time since the fire suppression signal had gone out, and there was no direction left that wasn't a wall. Owen stopped 4 feet behind him. They stood in the emergency exit threshold, Reese with his weapon still in his hand, facing the alley and 2 tactical officers who had their weapons up and were issuing commands in the clipped urgent language of people who have a protocol to execute and are executing it. Reese's weapon hand was at his side, not raised, not lowered. At his side, which was the in-between position, which was the position that ended conversations one way or the other, depending on what happened in the next 3 seconds. Reese, Owen said. The man didn't turn around. It's over, Owen said. The alley's covered. Marcus is down in the corridor. Your partner is down in the lobby. There's nowhere the math works anymore. You don't know that, Reese said. But his voice had something in it that suggested he did know it and was trying to find the alternative and couldn't. Put it down, Owen said. Easy for you to say. Nothing about this has been easy, Owen said. Put it down. Outside, the tactical officers were still issuing commands, still holding position. They had seen Owen behind Reese and were trying to read the configuration, which bought 30 seconds of restraint that could evaporate at any moment. Reese stood in the doorway with the Charlotte morning light on his face and whatever was happening inside him, happening in a place that Owen couldn't see or reach. And for 4 seconds it was entirely unclear which way it would go. Then Reese set the weapon on the ground. He stepped back from it. He put his hands up. He didn't say anything. His face had the look of a man who has just accepted the cost of a bad decision made a long time ago and is now standing in the full price of it without any argument left. The tactical officers moved. Owen stepped back into the corridor and pressed himself against the wall to let them through, and his shoulder chose that exact moment to remind him comprehensively of everything it had been through in the past 20 minutes. He put his back against the wall and stayed there, breathing, while the sounds of the tactical team moving through the corridor and into the lobby reached him in waves. He could hear Celeste's voice somewhere in the lobby. He could hear her telling someone she was fine, she wasn't injured. She needed someone to check on the woman with the baby near the window. Her voice was doing that thing again, the controlled clarity of someone managing something. Except it was cracking slightly at the edges now, the control starting to show its seams, which was normal and human, and meant she was finally letting herself feel the weight of the last 40 minutes. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the corridor floor. His shoulder was a serious problem. His hands were shaking, which they hadn't done during any of it, and were doing now, which was also normal and which he recognized from experience as the delayed arrival of everything the body had been holding at bay. He sat on the floor of the service corridor of the First Carolina Commerce Bank on South Tryon Street in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a Tuesday morning in April, and he thought about Maddie. He thought about the deposit receipt in his jacket pocket. He thought about the moment, 45 minutes ago, when he had been standing at the counter filling out a slip for $150 and thinking about how to have a conversation with his 9-year-old daughter about why they couldn't go on spring break trips, and how that had been the shape of his morning when it started. He thought, I need to call her school and tell them the deposit went through. And then he thought, I need to call Frank Dowell and tell him I'm all right, because Frank watches the news. And then he didn't think anything for a little while, because he was tired in the deep and specific way that had nothing to do with sleep, and the corridor floor was cold against the back of his legs, and from somewhere in the lobby, he could hear Sasha's baby finally, thoroughly, exhaustedly asleep. The tactical officer who found him 6 minutes later said afterward that the most unsettling thing about the whole scene was that the man who had apparently neutralized 2 armed individuals and chased a third into a tactical cordon was just sitting against the wall, looking at his hands with the mildly distracted expression of someone trying to remember if they'd left the stove on. Owen did not correct this characterization when he heard it later. He was thinking about his daughter, and about the deposit receipt, and about how he had to be at Haverford's by 1 o'clock for the afternoon refrigeration job on the south side, and about whether his shoulder was going to allow him to do any of that without a significant detour through an emergency room first. Celeste found him in the corridor 12 minutes after the tactical team secured the lobby. She came around the corner and stopped when she saw him on the floor, and for a moment her face did something complicated and unguarded that she might have managed differently if she'd had the energy for it. She didn't. The control had finished showing its seams and had now opened up completely, and she looked like a 30-year-old woman who had spent 45 minutes of the worst morning of her life holding herself together and was now standing in a corridor looking at the man who had made that possible and didn't know what to do with the feeling that produced. She sat down on the floor next to him, not against the wall because she was wearing a charcoal blazer that cost more than most people's rent. On the floor anyway. For a while neither of them said anything. Then she said, Your shoulder. I know. You need to let them look at it.
I know.
She looked at the side of his face. He was looking at the wall across the corridor. You moved things, she said. The rope barrier, the caution sign, the pens. You moved things before any of it started. It wasn't a question. Yes, Owen said. The cash room in the back. There's no cash room. No, you made it up to split them.
Yes.
She was quiet for a moment. The fire alarm. Yes, you triggered it deliberately. Yes, she exhaled. It was a long exhale, the kind that has a lot of things in it. Who are you? She said. Owen turned and looked at her for the first time since she had sat down. She was closer than he expected. Her hair had come loose from whatever it had been pinned in earlier, and she had a scrape along her left forearm that she apparently hadn't noticed and that someone needed to clean up. And her eyes, which were dark brown and direct in the way of someone who had spent years training themselves not to look away from things, were fixed on him with an intensity that was not accusatory and not grateful, and not any single clean emotion, but something more complicated than all of those. I told you, he said. Just a father. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away, at the corridor wall, and something in her posture settled slightly, not relaxing, but recalibrating, the way a person settles when they have decided to accept that they are not going to get the answer they wanted and are going to work with what they have. I asked them to move you, she said, at the counter. Before it started, I told the manager to move you out of my space. I know, I thought you were. She stopped. I know what you thought, Owen said. There was no reproach in it, just fact. I'm sorry, she said. It came out differently than apologies usually come out from people who aren't used to giving them, not polished, not managed, not the kind of sorry that protects the person saying it. It came out plain and a little rough, like something that had been sitting in a difficult place and was finally being set down. You don't have to apologize, Owen said. I know I don't have to, Celeste said. That's not why I'm doing it. Down the corridor, the tactical team was moving through the lobby in the systematic pattern of a scene being secured. Someone was calling for a medic. Someone else was calling for the negotiator to stand down. Situation resolved. The baby distantly started crying again, and then stopped. Owen's shoulder was a genuine problem. His hands had stopped shaking. He looked at the ceiling of the service corridor, which was unfinished concrete with a single utility light in a wire cage, and thought that Maddie was going to hear about this on the news before he could call her, and that the school secretary who always answered the phone at pickup time was going to know what happened before he got there, and that the whole neighborhood was going to know by Thursday, and that he was not particularly interested in any of that. He wanted to go home. He wanted to make Maddie dinner and sit at their kitchen table and listen to her tell him whatever she had learned that day, and not have it be a Tuesday that anyone remembered. That was what he wanted. What he had was a corridor floor and a woman sitting next to him who had come around the corner looking for him specifically, when she could have stayed in the lobby and let the professionals sort everything out, and who had sat down on the floor in her expensive blazer without apparently considering the alternative. He didn't know what to do with that. He suspected that not knowing what to do with it was going to be something he would be dealing with for longer than this morning. From the lobby, a tactical officer called his name. Owen put his hand on the wall and got himself upright, and the shoulder informed him comprehensively that the emergency room was not optional. Celeste stood up beside him, brushing off her blazer with the automatic gesture of someone whose hands needed something practical to do. They walked back to the lobby together. Through the glass of the front entrance, Charlotte was still doing what it always did, moving, busy, completely indifferent to the specific terrible hour that had just concluded inside this building. Patrol cars were doubled at the curb. An ambulance had pulled up behind them. People on the sidewalk across the street had their phones out, recording the scene with the particular avid interest of people who are very glad something is happening to someone else. Owen walked through the lobby, past Patricia, who was sitting on a chair with a paramedic crouched in front of her, past Darian, who was on his phone and crying in the contained way of someone who has decided to save the full reaction for later, past Sasha and her baby, who were being attended to by 2 officers near the window. He walked to the front exit. A tactical officer stopped him at the door. "Sir, we need a statement." "I know," Owen said. "I'll give you whatever you need. My daughter is at school. I need to call her first." The officer looked at him, looked at the shoulder, looked at whatever was visible in Owen's face that Owen himself couldn't see. Then he stepped aside. Owen walked out into the April morning in Charlotte, North Carolina, and stood on the sidewalk in his faded navy blue jacket, squinting against the light, and called his daughter's school. The secretary answered on the second ring. "This is Owen Barrett," he said. "Maddie's father. I need you to make sure she doesn't see any news today before I can talk to her." And the deposit, the one I sent this morning, just tell me it went through. Mr. Barrett. The secretary's voice was different from usual. Not the brisk administrative efficiency he was accustomed to. Something softer and concerned. It went through. And we've been watching the news here. Are you? I'm fine, Owen said. Tell her I'll be there at pickup. Same as always. He hung up. He stood in the sunlight with his ruined shoulder and his shaking that had stopped hands, and behind him, through the glass doors, he could see Celeste Marlowe talking to a tactical officer with the focused precision of someone giving a precise and useful account of everything that had happened. And every few seconds her eyes moved to the door where he was standing. He was not ready for whatever came next. He was also not under any illusion that whatever came next was going to ask his permission. The story broke before noon. By 1 o'clock, it was on every regional news station in the Carolinas. By 3, it had gone national. By the time Owen was sitting in an orthopedic exam room at Carolina's Medical Center, with his jacket off and his arm in a temporary sling, and a resident explaining to him in careful language that his shoulder had sustained a partial dislocation with associated ligament damage that was going to require either extended physical therapy or surgical consultation, depending on how the next 2 weeks developed, his name and a description that was slightly wrong in several details had been broadcast on 4 major cable networks and picked up by a wire service that distributed it internationally. He didn't watch any of it. He had kept his phone face down on the exam table for the last hour. It had been buzzing with the continuous low urgency of something that had gone from a frequency he recognized to a frequency he did not. And he was managing that by not looking at it, which was not a sustainable strategy, but was the only one available to him right now. The ligament, he said to the resident. How long? If you go the physical therapy route, 6 to 8 weeks before full range of motion returns. Realistically, 12 before you're back to 100%. And the surgical option, faster return in some cases. But recovery from the procedure itself is 4 to 6 weeks. And there are risks with any... I'll do therapy, Owen said. He had Maddie's pickup in 40 minutes and a job at Haverford's that he was already 4 hours late for, and which he needed to call about immediately. Surgery meant anesthesia, and anesthesia meant someone needed to be there when he woke up. And the list of people who could plausibly fill that role, without it becoming a complicated conversation, was short enough that he wasn't ready to have it. He called his boss from the exam room while the resident filled out paperwork. Danny Haverford answered on the second ring, with the voice of a man who had seen the news, and was somewhere between concerned and trying not to make it awkward. Owen. Jesus, you okay? Shoulder's messed up. I'm going to need some time. Take whatever you need. Obviously. Don't worry about it. I'll worry about it, Owen said. I just need a few days. I'll call you Thursday. Danny started to say something else, and Owen thanked him and ended the call, because Danny was a good man with good intentions, and right now good intentions were harder to navigate than practical problems. He picked up Maddie at 3:47, 17 minutes late, which had never happened in the 4 years she had been at Whitmore Elementary. She was sitting on the front steps of the school with her backpack between her feet and her chin in her hands, and when she saw the truck she stood up and walked to the curb, and when she saw the sling she stopped walking. He got out of the truck. Dad, she said. I'm fine, he said. You're in a sling. It's a minor, Dad. Her voice was serious in the way that her voice got serious, which was a specific register he had learned to pay careful attention to, because it meant she had moved past the emotional reaction and into the assessment phase, which was when she was most like her mother and most likely to say something that went directly past his defenses. I saw. On the iPad. Miss Patterson let me watch because she said it was better than finding out from the other kids. Owen crouched down to her level with his good arm. His shoulder made its objection known. How much did you see? Enough. She looked at him with Elena's eyes. Were you scared? He thought about the honest answer to that, which was complicated, and about the answer that would be useful to a 9-year-old, which was different, and about the fact that Maddie would know the difference. A little, he said, at the end. She thought about this. What were you scared of? Not getting home, he said. She nodded slowly, absorbing it. Then she picked up her backpack, walked around to the passenger side of the truck, and got in. He followed and got behind the wheel, and they drove for 4 minutes in silence, which with Maddie meant she was thinking rather than shutting down. The distinction was important. The lady on the news said you were a hero, she said finally. People say things on the news. Are you? He kept his eyes on the road. I did what needed doing. That's not an answer. He glanced at her sideways. She was looking out the windshield with the expression of someone who is going to keep asking until she gets what she's looking for, which was also her mother's expression, which he had never been able to outlast. I helped some people have a better Tuesday than they were going to have without me. That's all. Maddie considered this for another block. Then, your shoulder really okay? It'll take some time. It's not bad. Can you still cook dinner? I can cook dinner. Can you reach the high shelf? Not currently. I can reach the high shelf, she said, which was not quite true. She was 4'2", and the high shelf was 6 feet up, but was the kind of offer that carried something besides its literal meaning, and he understood it and was grateful for it in a way he didn't know how to say. Thanks, Bug, he said. She reached over and held his good arm with both of her hands for the rest of the drive home, which was 11 blocks, and she didn't say anything else, and neither did he. The national news cycle moved on within 48 hours. The way news cycles moved on, replaced by other things that were urgent and immediate, and would themselves be replaced within another 48 hours. Owen's name remained attached to the story in a secondary way mentioned in follow-up pieces, included in the summary graphics the cable channels used when they returned to the bank story during its brief second wave, 4 days later when the 3 men were formally charged and their arraignment photos circulated. Owen did not give interviews. He gave a statement to the Charlotte Police Department that was thorough and accurate, and he gave a follow-up statement to the FBI agents who were involved because the charges crossed several federal thresholds, and both times he was precise and direct and cooperative, and both times he declined to comment to the reporters waiting outside the relevant buildings when he was done. He had 2 reasons for this. The first was that he had spent 12 years in a profession where anonymity was operationally necessary, and the habit had not left him. The second was Maddie, whose school had already been contacted by 2 news organizations in the 3 days since Tuesday, and whose teacher had called Owen to say she was doing fine, but was fielding a lot of questions from her classmates. He didn't want her to be the daughter of someone people talked about. She already had enough things she carried. The department reached out 4 days after the incident through a lieutenant named Graves, who was straightforward and decent, and told Owen, with minimal preamble, that the department would like to formally recognize his actions at a press event the following week. Owen told Lieutenant Graves he appreciated the intention and was not going to attend, and when Lieutenant Graves pointed out that his attendance would be meaningful for the department's public relations, Owen said that was a problem the department would need to solve without him, and Lieutenant Graves, to his credit, did not push it further. The only thing Owen couldn't control was what other people did with the story. Celeste Marlowe held a press conference on Thursday. He found out about it the way he found out about most things he wasn't looking for. Frank Dowell knocked on his door at 7 in the evening with a 6-pack of something cold and a look on his face that combined genuine concern with the particular. Energy of a man who has witnessed something significant and wants to talk about it. And the press conference was the second thing Frank mentioned after asking about the shoulder. She didn't say so much, Frank said, settling into the kitchen chair that creaked, but had always been his chair when he visited. About the specific stuff. Your name came up, but she kept it short. Said something like, what was it? She said a member of the public demonstrated extraordinary presence of mind, and she owed him a debt she was still trying to understand the size of. Owen opened his beer with his good hand. She looked like she meant it, Frank said. Not like how they usually sound at those things. The PR stuff. She actually looked like she'd had a bad week and was being honest about it. She had a bad Tuesday, Owen said. Yeah, well, Frank drank. Most people don't come out of a bad Tuesday saying something like that in front of cameras. He paused. You going to call her? Why would I call her? Frank gave him a look that said he was going to decline to answer that question on the grounds that the answer was obvious. Owen did not call her. He went back to work on Thursday, as he'd told Danny he would, adjusted for the shoulder, which meant no heavy lifting and no jobs requiring overhead reach, which reduced his operational capacity by about 1/3, and was something he and Danny worked around without either of them making a production of it. He drove his routes. He fixed what could be fixed with one arm and a workaround. He picked up Maddie at 3:30, cooked dinner, reviewed her homework, read with her until 8, and went to bed. He was building the ordinary back, the way you rebuild something after it's been shaken carefully, piece by piece, putting each piece back in its place, checking to make sure it held before you put the next one on top. He was good at this. He had done it before, after Elena, and that had been considerably harder than anything that had happened in the bank, and he had managed it. He could manage this. The ordinary held for 11 days. On the 12th day, a car he didn't recognize pulled up in front of the Glenwood Market on Salter Street, where he was in the back room, assessing a commercial refrigeration unit that had been running warm for 3 weeks and was now running intermittently, which meant the compressor was probably going, and the owner, a Vietnamese man named Phan, who had run the store for 18 years, and whose son did Owen's taxes, was going to need a conversation about replacement costs. He had Maddie with him. She was at the small table in the break room doing her homework, with her backpack open and her pencil case arranged in the specific left-to-right order. She maintained with a consistency that made Owen quietly glad, because it meant she was working something out the way she always worked things out, through the organizing of small physical spaces around her. He heard the car. He heard the engine cut. He heard the front bell on Phan's door, and Phan's greeting, and he heard Phan say something that he couldn't quite catch, and then heard a pause, and then heard Phan say, more clearly, "He's in the back. Give me 1 moment." Owen had his head partially inside the refrigeration unit. He did not immediately think it was her. He was thinking about compressor coils, and the estimate he was going to have to give Phan, which was going to be more than Phan wanted to hear, and about the fact that Maddie's homework tonight included a fractions worksheet that she had mentioned with the specific tone of someone who has already decided something is going to be difficult. He heard the break room door. He pulled his head out of the unit. Celeste Marlowe was standing in the doorway of Phan's back room, wearing a camel-colored coat and slightly impractical shoes for a grocery store's back room, and an expression that was carefully constructed and doing a mediocre job of concealing the fact that she had no idea what she was going to say. Maddie looked up from her homework. "Hi," Maddie said. "Hi," Celeste said. They looked at each other for a moment with the uncomplicated directness of a child and an adult who have not yet established any pretense between them. "I'm Maddie. I know. I'm Celeste. I know," Maddie said. "You were on the news. So was your dad." Maddie looked at Owen. Owen looked at Celeste. Celeste looked at the floor for half a second before she looked back up, and in that half second Owen saw something that was not what he had expected, not the polished control of the woman who had arrived in the bank lobby 2 weeks ago, but something more exposed and less certain of itself. She had come here. She had driven to a neighborhood grocery store on the south side of Charlotte and walked into the back room, and she had not sent someone. She had come herself, which meant something, though he wasn't sure yet what. "Maddie," Owen said, "why don't you take your homework to the front and see if Mr. Phan will let you sit at the register counter?" Maddie assessed the situation with the quiet efficiency of a 9-year-old who understood when she was being given the room and who was deciding whether to accept the arrangement. "Can I have a juice?" she asked Celeste, with the particular logic of a child who, when someone unexpected has arrived, tests the social order by making an uncomplicated request. Celeste blinked. Then something in her face shifted into something genuine. "If your dad says it's okay." Owen nodded. Maddie packed her pencil case left to right, picked up her backpack and her worksheet, and walked past Celeste with the easy physical confidence of a child who has never been afraid to take up space, which Owen had worked very specifically to preserve in her. The door swung shut behind her. Owen and Celeste stood in the back room of a grocery store with the refrigeration unit humming its irregular complaint between them. "You found me," he said. "You're not particularly hidden," Celeste said. "Your contractor registration is public record. Most people don't look it up." "I'm not most people." She paused. "I know you know that." Owen leaned against the refrigeration unit and crossed his good arm over the sling and looked at her. She looked back at him without the deflection she'd been using when she first walked in, and what was underneath was not comfortable, but it was real, which was something. "Why did you come?" he said. "Because I needed to apologize properly," she said. "At the bank in the corridor, I said I was sorry, but I said it wrong. I said it like it was a thing I was acknowledging. I wanted to say it like I mean it. You already said it." "I know. I wanted to say it again differently." She held his gaze. "I asked the manager to move you like you were furniture. You were standing right there. You heard me." "I've been moved for worse reasons," Owen said. "That doesn't make it okay." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." She let out a breath. "I'm sorry, Owen. I looked at you and saw what was convenient to see. And that's not something I can fix with one sentence in a bank corridor." Owen thought about this. He thought about all the times in his life he had been moved for what was convenient in the Navy, early on, before people understood what he was, in the neighborhood, where the fathers who drove better trucks and wore cleaner clothes looked through him at school events, in the hardware store, where the salesman always talked to the guy next to him first. He had stopped cataloging it a long time ago, because cataloging it was exhausting, and the catalog never reached an end. I accept it, he said. Both versions. She nodded. Something eased in her shoulders. The other reason I came, she said, and then she stopped and recalibrated, the way someone does when the sentence they prepared no longer sounds right now that they're in the actual room. She looked at the refrigeration unit. Is that broken? Probably the compressor. Yes. Can you fix it? Not the compressor. Compressor needs replacing. I can manage the rest. She looked at it for a moment as if actually thinking about the compressor, and then she said, my company is going to give you a reward. That was decided at the board level. It's not negotiable from my end. It's a board decision, and the amount is substantial. I don't want a reward. I know you don't. I'm telling you it's been authorized, because I want to be transparent with you, not because I'm delivering a check. She looked back at him. I'm not here about the reward. I told the board to hold it until I talked to you. Owen waited. I've been thinking about what you did, she said. Not the physical part, the tactical part, the other part. Before that. Moving things. Positioning people. Everything you did that nobody else in that room noticed. They weren't supposed to notice. I know. That's what I keep thinking about. She sat down on the edge of the break room table carefully, like someone who doesn't usually sit on the edges of break room tables and is making a deliberate choice to do so. You walked into that bank worried about a deposit. $150, or however much it was. And while you were there, with all of that, with your own problems, your own reasons to be stressed, you were also doing something that none of the trained security personnel in that room were doing. You were thinking about everyone else. Owen didn't say anything. And it made me realize, Celeste said, that I run a company with 4,000 employees, and I have a security department that cost me $3 million to build, and my actual security, the real kind, the kind that works when something goes wrong, was provided on a Tuesday morning by a refrigerator repairman who was there to make a deposit before going to his next job. She said it plainly, without theater, which made it land harder than theater would have. That's not a criticism of your company, Owen said. It's a criticism of how I think about safety, Celeste said, which is that I thought about it the way I thought about you at the counter. I put it in the right category and moved on. I didn't look at it. Owen was quiet for a moment. The refrigeration unit cycled irregularly, the sound of something trying to do its job without the capacity to do it fully. What do you want? He asked. Not unkindly. I want you to consult, Celeste said. Not as a security contractor. I have security contractors. I want someone who thinks the way you think about what's actually in a room, about where the real problems are versus the cataloged ones. I want you to look at how my company protects people and tell me what I'm not seeing. I'm a refrigeration technician. You're a former Navy SEAL who currently works as a refrigeration technician, Celeste said. I did some reading. I couldn't access your service record. It's classified in ways I don't have clearance for, but there were enough secondary references to understand the shape of what you did. Owen's jaw tightened slightly. Those references are vague, she said quickly, genuinely vague. I'm not claiming I know specifics. I'm saying I understand the general. She paused. And I'm not asking you to be a security contractor. I'm asking you to be a consultant, your terms, your schedule. It doesn't touch what you do here or your time with Maddie. Owen looked at her for a long moment. There was something he needed to say, and he needed to say it clearly. The reward, he said. If your board is going to insist, and I'm not agreeing that I want it designated for an emergency response training fund, not for executives, for line workers, warehouse staff, drivers, cleaning crews, people who are actually in the buildings when things go wrong. Celeste looked at him steadily. I can do that. The people with the least protection are never the ones who get the training, Owen said. I've seen it. They get the directions to the nearest exit, and that's the end of their safety education. I know, she said. You're right. And she said it without qualification or caveat, which meant she had already thought about it and was not saying it to agree with him. The consulting, Owen said. If I do it, yes, I'm not going to be diplomatic about what I find. If I look at something and it's wrong, I'm going to say it's wrong. Good. That includes things that are expensive to fix. Owen. She said his name differently than she had in the corridor, after the robbery, not with the slight formality of someone using a name they've just been given, but with the familiarity of someone who has been thinking it for 11 days. I came here to listen to someone who sees what I don't. I'm not going to pay you to agree with me. He looked at the refrigeration unit. I need to finish the assessment on this, he said, and I need to get Maddie home for dinner. I know. Celeste stood up from the table. I'm not trying to keep you. Tomorrow, Owen said. Give me a number. I'll call you. She pulled a business card from her coat pocket and set it on the break room table next to Maddie's homework papers, and Owen noticed that the card was plain name, number, email, no title, no company logo, which was either a very calculated choice or an honest one, and he wasn't sure which yet. Thank you, she said. You're thanking me for agreeing to call you? I'm thanking you for not throwing me out, she said, and there was something in it that was almost wry, almost self-aware, and he understood that it was her version of an offering, a way of saying that she knew how this had looked, her walking in here with her camel coat and her business card, and she wasn't pretending otherwise. He picked up the business card, put it in his jacket pocket, next to where the deposit receipt had been 11 days ago. She left. He went back to the refrigeration unit. He had a compressor to assess and an estimate to deliver, and a 9-year-old waiting for juice and her fractions worksheet. And his shoulder was a consistent reminder of everything the last 2 weeks had cost him. And he stood in the back room of a grocery store and thought about what Celeste Marlowe had said with a part of his mind while the rest of it got back to work. He called the number on the card the next morning at 8:45. She answered before the second ring. I have conditions, he said. Tell me, he told her. There were 4 of them, and they were not the conditions of a man who was impressed by wealth or titles or the leverage that came with either. They were the conditions of a man who had built a life around one priority and was not willing to let anything compromise it. Maddie's schedule was non-negotiable. His regular clients took precedence over any scheduling requests that couldn't accommodate that. The training program, whatever shape it took, would be built around the people who needed it most, not the people who were easiest to reach or cheapest to train. And his name would not be used in any external communications about the program without his explicit permission each time. Celeste listened without interrupting. Yes to all 4, she said. That easy? I had 8 days to think about what you'd ask for, she said. I'm a good guesser. He was quiet for a moment. What did you guess wrong? She paused. I thought you'd ask for more time. More lead time before the first meeting. How much time did you give me in your guess? A week. I'll meet you Tuesday, he said, a short silence. That's 3 days. I know. She paused again, and in the pause he could hear her adjusting to something she hadn't expected, which was a small satisfaction that he didn't examine too closely. Tuesday works, she said. Same time as the bank, he said. Another pause. That's either a coincidence or you're a very specific kind of person. 9:15, he said. Your office. He ended the call. He sat at his kitchen table for a while in the morning quiet, with his coffee and his phone, and the low slant of spring light coming through the window over the sink. Maddie was at school. The neighborhood was doing its weekday thing, the garbage truck 2 streets over misses. Patterson's dog, the distant sound of the elementary school's bell that he could hear on still mornings from 4 blocks away. He thought about what he was getting into. He thought about it honestly, not the version where it was simple, not the version where it was nothing, but the actual version, with all the variables he couldn't fully see yet. He had lived in the honest version long enough to know that it was the only one worth living in. He thought about Elena. Not the way he usually thought about her, which was with the careful tenderness of something kept at a protective distance, but more directly what she would have said about Tuesday, about the bank, about the woman in the camel coat sitting on the edge of Fan's break room table with her plain business card and her 4,000-employee company, and her eyes that were not comfortable but were real. Elena would have said, Owen, stop treating the question like it's going to get easier if you wait. She would have been right. He didn't know what was going to happen. He knew that Tuesday was 3 days away and that he had agreed to walk into it, and that Celeste Marlowe was not a simple variable, and that simple variables had not been his life for a very long time. He finished his coffee. He went to work. The Tuesday meeting lasted 3 hours, and it was not the meeting either of them had prepared for. Owen had prepared to be professional and precise, and to identify the gaps in Vantara's emergency protocols, the way he identified gaps in poorly maintained refrigeration systems methodically, without editorial, focused on the mechanical rather than the personal. This worked for approximately 40 minutes, through the first 2 floors of the building walkthrough, and the review of the lobby security layout, and the discussion of the access control system, which had 3 significant weaknesses that Owen identified in sequence, with the calm efficiency of someone who has spent his career thinking about exactly these things. Then they walked into the 3rd floor open workspace, and Owen stopped. How many people work on this floor during business hours? He asked. 87, Celeste said. And the emergency exits? She pointed. One door, at the far end of the floor, marked with the standard green signage. One exit. We meet code. Code is the floor, he said. Code is the minimum that gets a building permitted, not the minimum that gets 87 people out of a room if something goes wrong. He walked the floor, noting the arrangement of desks, the position of the fire suppression heads, the sight lines from the various entry points. The staff watched him with cautious curiosity, several of them recognizing him from the news and choosing not to acknowledge it. How long has this layout been the same? 4 years, Celeste said, from behind him. 4 years, Owen repeated. Has anyone run an emergency drill on this floor in 4 years? She was quiet for a moment. That was its own answer. We do company-wide drills, she said. What does that mean, practically? An announcement comes over the intercom. People proceed to the designated assembly point. And how many people on this floor know where their designated assembly point is without reading the sign? Another silence. Right, Owen said. He turned around and looked at her. She was standing in the middle of the workspace with her arms at her sides, and her expression doing the thing. He was starting to recognize the external composure with the honest accounting running underneath it. The face of someone who has just been shown something they already suspected was true and is sitting with the discomfort of having confirmed it. The people in the most danger in an emergency, Owen said, are the ones who don't know the building. New hires, contractors, visitors on upper floors, first responders who've never been inside before. He paused. Not the people in corner offices. I know, Celeste said. Does the training program reflect that? No, she said. It doesn't, he nodded. Let's fix it. She looked at him across the 87-person workspace, with its ergonomic chairs and its collaborative pods and its genuine attempt to create the kind of environment where people felt valued. And she said, okay, one word. But it carried something, not a corporate decision, not a line item in a budget review. A genuine shift in the way she was looking at the problem. Owen was not a man who made easy assumptions about people changing. He had seen too many people who intended to change and didn't, who had the right meeting in the right room and walked out and went back to what they already knew. But he had also seen people who meant it, and the difference between those two things was something he had learned to hear very early in any conversation. He heard it in Celeste's voice. Whether that meant anything in the long run remained to be seen. But it was a Tuesday, and he was 3 blocks from a refrigeration job he was due at by noon. And Maddie had a field trip Friday that required a signed permission form he had left on the kitchen table, and his shoulder was at 60% and improving, and the work in front of him was real and specific and needed doing. He was not ready for whatever else might be coming. He was also not. He acknowledged to himself as he walked back toward the elevator with Celeste beside him, actively running from it. That was different from where he had been 11 days ago, standing outside the bank in the Charlotte morning, with his receipt in his pocket and his hands finally still. Different was not nothing. The emergency preparedness program that Owen and Celeste built together did not have a clean launch. It had a pilot run in October that went reasonably well on the warehouse floor and poorly in the executive suite, where 3 senior vice presidents spent 40 minutes arguing about whether the drill was mandatory for C-level staff, and one of them left early for a lunch reservation. It had a second run in November that was better, partly because Owen had stopped being diplomatic about the things he'd told Celeste he wasn't going to be diplomatic about, and had sent a written assessment to the entire leadership team that was 3 pages long and did not soften anything. It had a budget fight in December when the finance department flagged the cost of expanding the program to the distribution centers in Raleigh and Greensboro and suggested a scaled-back version that covered only the Charlotte headquarters. Owen attended that meeting. He brought a single page of data showing the demographic breakdown of who worked in the distribution centers versus who worked in the Charlotte headquarters, and he put it on the table and said, "These are the people who need this most, and you're cutting them first. That's the decision you're making." He said it the way he said most things, without heat, without theater, just plain, and the room was quiet for a long moment before Celeste said, "Keep the distribution centers in." The finance director looked like he wanted to argue and looked at Owen, and decided not to. It was not clean. It was not the way Celeste had imagined it going. When she sat in Fan's back room and said the word consult with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed it. Real things rarely went the way they were imagined, which was something she was learning to make her peace with one department meeting at a time. But it worked. By February, 1,100 workers across Vantara's 4 facilities had completed the basic emergency response certification that Owen had designed from scratch, starting with the principle that the information needed to be practical rather than procedural, memorable rather than comprehensive, and delivered in a way that assumed the people receiving it were intelligent adults who deserved to be treated as participants rather than liability checkboxes. He had written the curriculum at his kitchen table in the evenings, while Maddie did homework across from him, occasionally asking questions that he answered honestly, because she was old enough, and because she had earned it on the Tuesday when she sat in the front seat of the truck and held his arm all the way home without asking him to explain himself. The workers responded to the training the way Owen had known they would, seriously, gratefully, and with the specific kind of attention that comes from people who have spent their careers being treated as an afterthought to their own safety. He ran a session at the Greensboro Distribution Center in late January, in a loading dock area that smelled of cardboard and forklift exhaust, with 64 people sitting on folding chairs and a whiteboard and no PowerPoint, and afterward, a woman who had worked the floor for 11 years told him it was the first time anyone from management level had ever asked her what she thought the hazards were in her own workspace. He wrote that down when he got back to the truck. He was not a man who wrote things down as a habit. He wrote that one down. Celeste heard about it because she asked. She had learned to ask Owen directly, which was the only method that reliably worked indirect approaches, forwarded emails, inquiries routed through his loosely defined consulting agreement. All of these produced responses that were accurate but partial. A direct question got a direct answer, and over the months of working together, she had learned to ask more precisely, which had the secondary effect of making her better at asking questions generally, which several of her department heads had noticed without being able to articulate why. They had dinner for the first time in early December. Not a planned dinner. An accident of logistics. They had been at the Vantara offices until 7:30 resolving a problem with the Raleigh Distribution Center's emergency communication system, and Owen had a sitter with Maddie until 9, and Celeste had said there was a decent Thai place 2 blocks down if he hadn't eaten, and he had said fine, mostly because he was genuinely hungry, and the alternative was a granola bar in the truck. They sat in a restaurant booth for 90 minutes and talked about the communication system for the first 20 minutes, and then stopped talking about the communication system, which neither of them fully acknowledged was happening. They talked about Maddie, who was doing well in school and had recently decided she wanted to learn to play the drums, which Owen had responded to with a kind of resigned acceptance that Celeste found genuinely funny. They talked about the Vantara acquisition that had been the reason for the bank visit in April, which had eventually closed 2 weeks late due to the legal complications arising from the events of that Tuesday, which Celeste described with the dry matter-of-factness of someone who had spent enough time with lawyers to find dark humor in the timeline. They talked about Elena briefly, because Celeste asked carefully, and Owen answered carefully, and the conversation stayed in a place that was honest without being more than either of them was ready for. They did not talk about what the dinner was. Owen drove home at 8:50 with 10 minutes to spare before the sitter's deadline, and he sat in the parked truck for a moment before going inside, doing the thing he did when he was being honest with himself, not thinking, exactly, but letting whatever was actually true settle to the surface without interference. What was actually true was that he had had dinner with a woman for the first time in 6 years, and had not spent the entire dinner wishing he was somewhere else. He went inside and paid the sitter and checked on Maddie and went to bed, and he did not know what to do with the thing that was actually true, and he decided to leave it alone for a while and see what it did. It did not stay alone. Maddie met Celeste for the second time in January, when the training program brought Celeste to the South Side for a community presentation Owen was giving at a neighborhood rec center, which had been organized by a local emergency preparedness coalition that Owen had connected with through one of the city's first responder networks. Celeste had not been planned as an attendee. She had heard about it through Owen's consulting schedule and had asked, without quite explaining why, whether it was a public event. Owen had said yes, and she had come. She sat in the back of the rec center on a folding chair in jeans and a plain jacket, which was the most deliberate, un-Celeste Marlowe thing Owen had ever seen her do, and it had worked. Nobody in the room recognized her. Maddie was in the front row because she liked to be in the front row, and at some point in the middle of Owen's presentation she had turned around, spotted Celeste in the back, and given her a small specific wave that Celeste returned before she had decided to. After, when the room had cleared, and Owen was talking to two of the coalition organizers, and Maddie was eating a cookie from the refreshment table with the focused satisfaction of a child who has been patient and is now receiving the appropriate compensation, Celeste sat next to her at the table. "He's good at that," Celeste said, nodding toward Owen. Maddie looked at her father across the room with the appraisal of someone who has been observing the subject for 9 years. "He's good at most things," she said, "except cooking pasta. He always makes too much." "How much is too much?" "Like enough for 6 people. There's only 2 of us. That's a lot of pasta." "We have leftovers for days," Maddie said. She considered Celeste for a moment, with the directness that Owen also had, though in Maddie it was less guarded. The same quality before experience had taught it to be selective. "Do you like him?" Celeste looked at her. "I mean, as a person," Maddie clarified, though her tone suggested she was aware the clarification was doing limited work. "Some people meet him, and they're weird about it because of the bank thing. They treat him like he's not just a regular person." "He's not exactly a regular person," Celeste said. "He is, though," Maddie said, with a certainty that was not childish but simply true. "He worries about parking. He forgets things at the grocery store. He fell asleep watching a documentary about penguins last month. He's a person." Celeste looked at Maddie Barrett for a long moment and thought that this 9-year-old had just delivered more useful information about Owen than Owen had communicated in 6 months of working together, and had done it with the breezy efficiency of someone who didn't know she was being informative. "Yes," Celeste said. "I like him." Maddie nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good," she said, and reached for another cookie. The thing between Owen and Celeste grew the way real things grow awkwardly, inconsistently, with gaps and reversals, and several conversations that started wrong and had to be restarted. In February, Owen told her about Elena. Not the sanitized version, not the story he told in the rare moments when he was asked the facts, the timeline, the careful structure that kept the emotional content at a manageable distance. He told her the real version in her car in a parking garage after a late working session, because she had asked him something that broke through the managed version and into the actual one, and he had realized, in the moment of deciding whether to answer, that he was tired of maintaining the distance. Elena had been sick for a year before Maddie was born. Not the slow, ambiguous kind of sick that leaves room for interpretation. The direct kind. She had known, and Owen had known, and they had made Maddie anyway, because Elena had said in the specific, deliberate way, she said things that mattered, that she was not going to spend whatever time she had being afraid, and that a baby was the opposite of being afraid. Maddie was born in June. Elena died the following March. Maddie was 9 months old and had her mother's eyes and would have them for the rest of her life. Owen had left the Navy 3 months after that, not because he couldn't do the work, but because the work was no longer the thing that mattered most, and he had made a choice about what did. He told Celeste all of it. She listened without filling the silences, which was something he had not expected and something he noticed. She did not offer anything that was designed to make it easier for her to hear or easier for him to have said. When he finished, she sat with it for a moment, and then she said, "She sounds like someone who knew who she was." "She did," Owen said, very clearly. "Maddie has that." "Yeah," Owen said. "She does." They sat in the parking garage for another few minutes, and then Owen said he needed to get home, and he got out of the car, and they did not talk about the conversation directly for several weeks. But something had shifted, the way things shift, when a weight is moved from one place to another, and the space it occupied becomes available for something else. They had a second dinner in March, a third in April, on a Wednesday evening that neither of them had planned to be anything, that turned into something when Celeste said something that made Owen laugh, actually laugh, the real kind, not the polite acknowledgement, and the sound of it seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. In May, he held her hand. They were walking back from a restaurant, and it was raining slightly, and it was not a dramatic moment in any external sense, and he reached over and took her hand the way someone does when they have decided to stop waiting and see what happened. And she held it back, and that was that. It was not simple after that. Owen was not a simple person, and Celeste was not a simple person, and Maddie, who was perceptive enough to understand what was happening before either adult confirmed it, had opinions she delivered with characteristic directness. She liked Celeste. She was also protective of Owen in the specific way of a child who has spent years watching her father navigate the world with care and is not going to accept anything that disrupts the equilibrium he has built. She tested Celeste once, in early summer, with a piece of deliberate rudeness that she would later apologize for, with the seriousness of someone who genuinely understood what they had done and was not apologizing to clear their conscience, but because it had been wrong. Celeste, for her part, did not manage Maddie. She did not apply the same professional control she used in every other relationship. She was simply present with her, interested, honest, occasionally wrong, willing to say so. She asked Maddie real questions and listened to the answers, even the long, meandering ones about whatever book she was reading or whatever disagreement she was having with a classmate. She showed up to the spring school concert and sat in an uncomfortable gymnasium chair for 2 hours and photographed Maddie's class with the intensity of someone who understood they were witnessing something that mattered. Owen watched all of this from the other side of it, from the position of a man who is very good at reading rooms, and who had read this one clearly enough to understand that the thing he had been afraid of, that allowing someone in, would disrupt the careful balance he had maintained for 6 years, that it would fracture something that could not be repaired, was not happening. Something different was happening. Something he did not have a fully accurate word for, but which felt, when he let himself feel it directly, rather than from a managed distance, like an addition rather than a replacement. Elena was not being replaced. She was not being moved or diminished or filed away. She was in Maddie's eyes every morning, and in the way Owen still talked about her, with the present tense directness of someone whose relationship with a person does not end when the person does. She was in the apartment, and in the choices Owen had made, and in the man he had become over 6 years of making those choices without anyone to share them with. She was not leaving. Something else was arriving alongside her. He was 38 years old, and he was a refrigeration technician and a safety consultant and a father, and he was also, as of a rainy evening in May in Charlotte, North Carolina, a man who was in love with someone, and the love had arrived the way it apparently arrives for people who have already loved once and know its weight, not with the urgent brightness of the first time, but with the sober and specific gravity of something chosen. He proposed in September. He had not planned it extensively, which was uncharacteristic for a man who planned everything, but he had thought about it long enough to know that extensive planning was wrong for this particular thing. He had talked to Maddie first, which was the only planning he had done, and the conversation had lasted 20 minutes and had included Maddie asking 3 practical questions and 1 emotional one, and the emotional one had been, "Do you think Mom would think she was good?" And Owen had said yes, and Maddie had said, "Okay then," which was her version of a blessing and carried everything a blessing should carry. He did it at home. Not a restaurant, not a scenic overlook, not anywhere that required reservations or a photographer or any of the production that the occasion was supposed to demand according to sources Owen had no patience for. He did it in the kitchen on a Sunday evening when Maddie had strategically absented herself to her room after dinner under the pretext of homework, which she had organized herself with a transparency she thought was subtle and was not. He had made too much pasta, as he always did. Celeste was washing a dish when he came up beside her and said her name, and she turned around, and he was looking at her in the way he had looked at the lobby when it was full of armed men, and frightened people fully, completely, without anything held back for self-protection. He said, "You changed the shape of things. I didn't think that was going to happen again, and you changed it anyway, and I want you to keep changing it." She looked at him. "That's not elegant," he said. "No," she agreed. Her voice was not entirely steady. "I don't do elegant." "I know." She was still holding the dish. "Owen, marry me," he said. "Not because of the bank. Not because of the program or the consulting or any of it. Because of Sunday evenings and too much pasta, and because Maddie thinks you're good, and she's right." Celeste set the dish on the counter very carefully. The way someone sets something down when their hands are not reliable, and she looked at him for a moment. That was long enough to contain everything: the bank and the corridor and the parking garage and the rain in May, and every conversation in between, the ones that had gone wrong and had to be restarted, the ones that had gone right, the ones she had not seen coming and would not have predicted from the distance of the woman she had been on that Tuesday morning in April when she walked into a bank in Charlotte thinking about indemnity clauses. "Yes," she said. Maddie appeared in the kitchen doorway approximately 4 seconds later, which suggested she had not been doing homework. "I knew it," she said, with the satisfaction of someone whose prediction has been confirmed. She looked at Celeste with her mother's eyes and said, "You're going to have to do something about the pasta situation." "We'll work on it," Celeste said. Her voice was still not entirely steady, which was honest, and she didn't try to fix it. Owen looked at the two of them, his daughter in the doorway with her arms crossed and her expression of proprietary satisfaction, and the woman by the sink who had sat down on a break room floor in her expensive blazer, and asked him who he was and felt the weight of the moment in the way he felt things that were real, directly, without the buffer of irony or distance. He was not a man who had expected this. He was a man who, on a Tuesday morning in April, had walked into a bank worried about $150 and whether he was making enough to give his daughter the life she deserved. He had not been thinking about himself. He had not been thinking about what was missing from his own life, because he had stopped keeping inventory of that a long time ago on the grounds that the inventory was not useful. What he had not accounted for was that the life he was already living, the careful, constructed, quietly devoted life of a man who had traded a dangerous career for a kitchen table and a truck and a daughter who held his arm on difficult drives home, was not smaller than the life he had left. It had just been incomplete in a way he had not allowed himself to name. He could name it now. They were married the following spring on a Saturday afternoon in a small ceremony that had 43 people in it, which was more than Owen had wanted and fewer than Celeste's board would have considered appropriate, and was therefore exactly right. Maddie stood beside Owen in a dress she had chosen herself with the same left-to-right organizing principle she applied to her pencil case, and she held her flowers with the focused solemnity of a 10-year-old who understands she is witnessing something permanent and is treating it with the seriousness it deserves. There were no gunmen, no cameras in the way that mattered, no billion-dollar contracts or hidden identities or classified files between them. There was Owen in the suit he had borrowed from Frank Dowell, and then returned, and then bought a version of because Frank's wasn't quite right across the shoulders. And there was Celeste in something she had bought herself, without telling anyone what it cost. And there was Maddie between and beside and around them, in the specific way of a child who has claimed something as hers, and is not making a secret of it. The year after that, Vantara's emergency preparedness program was adopted by 4 other major employers in the Charlotte metro area, and Owen hired 2 people to help him run it, and the program trained 11,000 workers in the first year of expansion, which was not a clean number and not a headline number, but was a real number that meant something. The year after that, a fire broke out in a Vantara distribution center outside Raleigh on a Wednesday afternoon. 43 workers were on the floor. They evacuated in under 4 minutes. Nobody was seriously injured. The fire investigator noted in his report that the evacuation had been notably more organized than was typical, and attributed it to what he called an unusually well-prepared workforce. Owen read the report in his office, a real office now, small and somewhat cluttered, with a credenza that Celeste had sent over from the Vantara headquarters that he hadn't asked for and had put there because she had sent it, and he thought about the woman in Fawn's break room who had told him she was the first person from management who had ever asked her what she thought the hazards were. He thought about that, and he put the report down, and he called Celeste, who was in a board meeting, and picked up anyway, which was a thing she had stopped apologizing for because the board had learned to accept it. "The Raleigh report," he said. "I read it," she said. Her voice had something in it. 43 people, Owen said. "Yeah," a pause. "You built that. We built that." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the background murmur of the board meeting suspended around her, 12 people waiting for the CEO to finish a personal call, and he thought about how far that was from the woman who had almost had him moved away from her private signing area, and how the distance between those 2 points was not a straight line, but a crooked, difficult human one. "Come home early," she said. "Board meeting, they can finish without me." He smiled. She couldn't see it. He smiled anyway. "I'll make dinner." "Don't make pasta." "I'm making pasta." "Owen, I'll make something else," he said. "Come home." She came home. Maddie graduated from Whitmore Middle School on a Friday afternoon in June, 4 years after a Tuesday morning, that nobody in the family referenced by date anymore. The way you stop referencing the specific date of a thing once it has been fully absorbed into the person you became because of it. Owen sat in the gymnasium bleachers next to Celeste, and Celeste held his hand the way she always held it, without theater, without the consciousness of it that people have in the early stages of a thing, just the settled ease of something that has become as natural as the arrangement of a room you have lived in long enough that you stop seeing the furniture. Maddie crossed the stage and took her certificate and shook the principal's hand. And when she turned to find her family in the bleachers, she found them immediately, because she always found them immediately, and she gave them the specific look that was hers, not a wave, not a performance. Just a look that said, "I see you and you're mine." And then she turned and walked back to her seat with her certificate under her arm, and her shoulders straight, and her mother's eyes carrying everything they always carried. Owen looked at her and thought, I walked into a bank worried I wasn't enough. He thought about the deposit receipt that had been in his pocket. He thought about the worn work jacket and the $150, and Frank Dowell's loan, and the refrigeration unit at Fan's that he had replaced 3 months later when Fan finally admitted it was beyond repair. He thought about the floor of the service corridor, sitting against the wall with his hands finally still, not knowing what was coming next. He had not known. He had not planned it, and not engineered it, and not assessed the variables, and built a strategy around them the way he built everything else. It had simply arrived in a camel coat, with a plain business card and honest eyes and a willingness to sit on a break room floor, and he had made a series of choices about whether to meet it, and the choices had accumulated into something he could not have described to himself on that Tuesday morning with any accuracy. The thing about life, Owen had concluded not from a book, not from a speech, but from the specific evidence of his own, was that it did not organize itself around the moments you prepared for. The bank robbery had not been on his calendar. Elena's illness had not been something he had seen coming when he was 28 and certain about everything. Maddie's existence had not been a plan, but a decision made in the face of grief, which was the bravest thing anyone Owen had ever known had done. And Celeste. Celeste had not been anything he had imagined for himself, in the years when he still imagined things for himself, because she was not the shape of what he thought was left for him. She was too direct and too driven and too much, and also, underneath all of that, startlingly honest about her own failures in a way that he had not expected from someone who had spent 4 years being described in the financial press as exceptional. She was not exceptional in the way the press meant it. She was exceptional in the way that mattered, the way that a person who has looked honestly at themselves and not liked everything they saw and kept looking anyway is exceptional. Not the gleaming kind, the real kind. He had learned that sitting on a corridor floor and watching her emerge from the lobby to find him. She had come looking for him. In the middle of the organized chaos of a crime scene resolution, with tactical officers and paramedics and the accumulated urgency of 45 minutes of genuine terror dissolving around her, she had come looking for him specifically. He had not asked her why. He didn't need to. Some things were clear enough without explanation. Next to him, Celeste watched Maddie in the bleachers with the expression she had when she thought no one was watching unguarded, soft in a way her public face was not. The face of someone who has been given something they did not earn and know it and are not going to be careless with it. She felt him watching and turned. "You okay?" she said. "Yeah," he said. She looked at him the way she had looked at him from the lobby floor on a Tuesday in April, trying to understand what he was. She had been trying to understand what he was for 4 years, and she had concluded correctly that he was not a mystery to be solved, but a person to be known, which was different and took longer and was worth considerably more. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the shoulder that had been damaged and had healed, and had a small pocket of scar tissue that the physical therapist had told him was permanent, but which he had come to regard as simply part of the architecture now, the way all the things that had happened to him were part of the architecture. In the gym, the principal was still calling names. Maddie sat straight in her chair in the 3rd row, certificate in her lap, already looking for the door that would lead to them and Trent, and then to the rest of the afternoon, and then to the rest of everything. Owen watched her and thought, "Your mother would be so proud." He did not say it out loud, because it did not need to be said out loud. He said it in the private interior way that had no audience and needed none. And then the principal called the next name, and the gymnasium filled with the particular warm noise of people applauding something ordinary. That is extraordinary if you look at it correctly. An Owen Barrett single father, Navy SEAL, refrigeration technician, safety director, husband, sat in the bleachers with his wife's head on his repaired shoulder and watched his daughter prepare to walk into whatever came next. He had walked into a bank one Tuesday morning with a deposit slip and $150, and a father's specific and consuming worry about whether he was doing enough. He had walked out with everything he didn't know he still needed. None of it had been smooth. None of it had been without cost. But it had been real, which was the only thing that had ever mattered to him, and it was his, which was the only thing that had ever been enough.